Press the bell icon on the YouTube app and never miss another update.
To India now, where the government is trying to introduce a law criminalizing what is known as instant verbal divorce. The triple talaq allows men to divorce their wives simply by saying the word 3 times. While many have welcomed the move, there's also been resistance. Some have claimed it's an attempt to demonize the Muslim community. Meha Punya explains from New Delhi.
7 years ago, Ashia Ismail's marriage ended when her husband threw her out of their home. He ended their marriage by simply saying the Arabic word for divorce, talaq, 3 times.
It was very easy for him because there was no legal binding, it was not criminalized, so there was no punishment for him.
The Indian government has now brought a bill to Parliament that would criminalize this sort of instant verbal divorce. The Muslim Women Protection of Rights on Marriage Bill proposes a 3-year prison term for any man who imposes an instant divorce on his wife, the immediate arrest of the husband, and the woman continue to receive financial assistance from her husband. Triple talaq has already been outlawed by the country's Supreme Court, but the government claims despite the court ruling, 67 new cases have been reported so far.
This is for reform, for India's daughters, for our sisters in the Muslim community. This is for their equality and dignity. This bill is for gender justice.
The opposition has stalled the passage of this bill. It wants the government to compensate victims of triple talaq. Muslim groups call this a larger conspiracy by the Hindu majority BJP.
This is not a law to provide justice to Muslim women, but you are giving a handle to Muslim men to do more injustice and to ensure that your dream of having more Muslim in jail will be realized. This is what you are doing.
Some people also warn that by not consulting the Muslim community while drafting the bill, the government has alienated the group further.
This goes along with the majoritarian politics of Hindutva, which has portrayed the community of Muslims in a particular kind of a negativity associated with it. One of those negativities is also the way in which it treats women. It is assumed that Muslim women are the most oppressed, that Muslim men are supposedly atrocious people, and therefore a state is the protector.
A bill that promised to bring in gender justice has now exposed the religious fault lines in India. The question now is, could this bill really be about reaping political dividends with the majority right before the upcoming general elections? Neha Punia, TRT World, New Delhi.
Well, earlier I spoke to Zakia Soman, who is the co-founder of the BMMA, an Indian Muslim women's movement. She says Muslim women are seeking the rights given to them in the Quran.
There can be a small percentage of abuse in any law. We have a dowry law in our country. We have an anti-domestic violence law in our country. There can be a 0.5% or 1% misuse, but that cannot be the reason for denying us the legal protection and the law. And my simple question to them is, why don't you concede to us our Quranic rights? If you concede to us our Quranic rights happily on your own, then this situation would not arise.
Let's go now to Sumit Ganguly, who is Professor of Political Science at Indiana University, who is against this law. I believe you heard from our guest Zakia Soman there earlier. What is your response then to what she had to say?
I'm not against the law per se. I just have some serious qualms about this particular government introducing this law. I think the law is actually quite a positive step in terms of removing this kind of horrible onus on Muslim women in India. Other Muslim countries have done away with this particular law or this particular injunction. And I think it's entirely appropriate that India also embrace this law. My qualm primarily stems from the fact it's this particular government that has introduced this law, given that this government has a terrible record of treating minorities, and particularly India's largest minority, 170 million people, Muslims. And consequently, I am skeptical about their motivations.
Whatever their motivations, is this law, at the end of the day, not going to help protect the rights of Muslim women in India who don't have any legal protection when it comes to this issue?
That's absolutely right. Their motivations aside, the outcomes that could stem from this law would be, I think, mostly positive. And this is where I disagree with the sociologist whom you interviewed. I think he is right about the motivations of the government, but I think he's wrong about the consequences of the likely consequences of the law. I think the law is actually quite a progressive step in the right direction. My concern largely stems from the fact that I think this government is doing it primarily to reap electoral advantage.
So expand on that point. You're talking about the Modi government. What is your issue then with how the minorities are being dealt with in India?
There, I think, have been repeated attacks on minorities, and the Prime Minister has maintained a deafening silence when these attacks have taken place. For example, a number of individuals who were transporting cows, often quite legally, were beaten up or killed by vigilante groups across the country, and the Prime Minister has not said a word about it. A Muslim man last year was actually killed because certain individuals in his village argued that he had been keeping beef in his refrigerator when there was no evidence to that end. And most of the people who were involved in this act of vigilantism are still running around scot-free, even though cases have been lodged against them. So I am quite concerned about the plight of Muslims in India at the moment under the present government.
If you are concerned and others are concerned about the plight of Muslims, are there not other ways to fight it than fighting this law?
No. Obviously there are other ways to fight it, and I have spoken out vigorously about this matter. I have written about this matter in various publications, and I will continue to voice my concerns about the treatment of minorities. But I wish this law had been introduced in a fashion where more consultation had been involved with key members of the Muslim community, and thereby a greater consensus might have been forged before introducing the bill in Parliament.
Sumit, I appreciate you joining us here on the program and your insights. Sumit Ganguly, Professor of Political Science at Indiana University, talking about that rather controversial divorce